It's Monday, the 29th of May, 2016. Happy birthday to Jeremy Lamb and Harrison Barnes. To the Red Rock Basketball Monster Show, brought to you by Loot Crate and ETQ86. My name is Josh Lloyd, and if you want to sponsor the podcast like ETQ86, all you need to do is leave a review on iTunes. It is that straightforward, and you can become a sponsor of the show. So thank you to everyone who has done that throughout the duration of this podcast. It's been tremendous, and thank you to ETQ for lending his support, or his or her support, to this show. This show, we are indeed doing the Utah Jazz season in review podcast. If you are watching live, which you can always do on YouTube, and you want to interact with the show, tweet at me at redrock_bball. And you can ask me any questions live as we're going to air. We're talking Utah Jazz, so
let's get to it.
Indeed. The Jazz, a team that many people thought would be a playoff team. They suffered an extraordinary amount of injuries, like a lot of teams did, and a lot of teams that missed the playoffs did. Injuries, prolonged periods to Rudy Gobert, Derek Favors, Gordon Hayward missed some time as well. Alec Burks missed a big chunk of the season. We saw Dante Exum obviously missed the entire year. So lots of their key players missing big chunks of time. They ended up with a 40-42 record, which is not terrible, and they didn't miss the playoffs by much. In the end, they probably should have made the playoffs. Some really poor losses from them down the stretch cost them a playoff spot. But they're going to be hungry. They're going to be ready to go again for next season, and they should improve on that record, assuming everyone stays healthy and everyone develops, which you would imagine they would. A couple of their players had some pretty big growth in their performances this season. I'm going to talk about that very shortly. I want to look at let's look at it now. The picks that they've got in the upcoming draft. They've got pick 12 in the first round, which it's not an awesome pick, but it's not terrible. They'll be able to get someone who contributes in the rotation, and they don't need a starter. And given the way that their team looks, where do you fit someone? Hayward, Hood, Gobert, Favors. Maybe you could say Exum is still a question mark, but they've got pretty high hopes with Dante to be the starting point guard. They can just get someone to be a rotational guy at pick 12. They've got 3 other picks in the second round as well. Pick 42, pick 52, and pick 60 in that second round. We'll see sort of what that brings them. In terms of their free agent situation, they've got Trevor Booker, who is an unrestricted free agent coming up for this season. That is the only free agent they've got on the books. They've got a couple of guys with unguaranteed or non-guaranteed deals. Shelvin Mack, who came across in that trade at the trade deadline. They've got Chris Johnson with a $1 million non-guaranteed contract, and Jeff Withey with a $1 million guaranteed contract. I would imagine they guaranteed Withey's contract because he provided some real key minutes when Favors and Gobert were both out. Now, Shelvin Mack, at 26 years old, at $2.4 million as a backup point guard, you would almost be guaranteed that they will guarantee his contract. Chris Johnson, he had moments in maybe 1 game, 2 games, but overall he struggled, and he could, if they're looking at bringing players in, which you don't imagine they're going to be a massive destination for players, but to fit their draft pick in at pick 12, they might have to cut ways with Johnson. As for Booker, whether they bring him back remains to be seen. They've got obviously a really interesting backup big in Trey Lyles who could fit that role of Trevor Booker. And if he's not back, I wouldn't be surprised. But he did provide some pretty decent minutes and some key performances. But I don't think they'll be overly keen on retaining him as we move forward. Let's take a look at their team now and start to break down the fantasy value of these guys on this team. And we'll start with the best fantasy player on this team, and it is indeed Derek Favors. I would have predicted at the start of the season that it was going to be Gordo Hayward. He did have a bit of a drop-off. Daniel Charles, obviously watching live, just tweeted at me talking about the Jazz's needs. He says they need a 6th man. Alec Burks is their 6th man. Alec Burks will be their 6th man, and they've got Trey Lyles as their backup big man. So Burks is not a great player, but he's really struggled with injury, shoulders, and the broken leg this season. I think that he fits into that 6th man role perfectly on this team. So I'm not sure that they are super desperate for a 6th man. I think Burks fits that role. Back to Favors, he had a real good year. He finished 29th in 9-cat leagues, 34th in 8-cat leagues. And that's a big jump up from last season when he was a 42nd and 47th, respectively. Is he their best player? I think he's their best player. I rate him higher than I do Gobert. I really do like Gordo Hayward, but Favors to me is developing into their best guy. He played 62 games only, so the injury was a real concern. That the back problems that kept him out for basically a month was an issue. 16.5 points. He had 8 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 1.2 steals, 1.5 blocks, 52 and 71%. From the line. And that free throw percentage had been something that had been a concern of his. He'd never hit 70% in a season, but he got to it this year. He'd been at 67 the 2 years prior, 69, 65, and 60 the rest of the years in his career. So that's a big jump there. He also took his steals to a career high level. The 1.5 blocks is pretty standard. 8 rebounds. He scored at a career high rate. He had a career season, and he's a guy that if the West wasn't completely loaded, which he might be good enough to even get himself an all-star berth, because he is, to me, one of the best power forwards, best young power forwards in the game. And from a fantasy point of view, he's a definite top or round 4 pick, or inside the top first 4 rounds. And I have no hesitation in grabbing him in those first 3 rounds. And I don't reckon you have to. His ADP for last season was 45, so you could grab him outside the top 3 rounds, and he comfortably finished inside those top 3 rounds. Where he sits next year, I don't see him regressing much. Rudy Gobert, he was injured, but they played a lot together because a lot of their injuries overlapped, and Gobert had a stinker of a year by his preseason expectations. We'll talk about him in a sec. But Favors is the man here. He's the best scorer in that front court. Obviously, he's a great defender. He's a pretty good shot blocker. He's a good scorer. He does a lot of things well, and I think that his value is, it might not increase a huge amount, but I think he's going to be pretty steady at that role and at that level of production over the next 3 to 4 years. He's only 24 years old, so he's not old at all. We've still got the best of Derek Favors to come, and in the next 2 to 3 years, he could get himself in the top 25 guys. I think top 20 maybe is pushing it a little bit. But he can get better than that. He can score a bit more. He can do a little bit more defensively. He can improve his percentages again. Instead of being a 51 from the field, he can get to a 53 or a 54. That's definitely a possibility. But I really like Favors. And to me, he's a completely underrated player in the NBA. And he's an underrated fantasy asset as well. He did finish second on this team in win shares, but led the team in win shares per 48 minutes. His box score plus minus was second on the team. He had posted still a stellar defensive box score plus minus, where he was third on the team there. A positive offensive box score plus minus, a really good VORP number. PER that led the team at 21.6. He did pretty much everything that he needed to do. And as you can tell, I'm a big Utah Jazz fan in general. They're not my team, but I like so. There's no one on the Jazz who look at it and go, well, "Who's this guy? Like, well, what is this guy doing?" That's not. I don't look at that on this team. There are players that you hear me talk about. Aaron Aflalo, Tony Roten, guys like that I'm not a massive fan of their game. I look at the Utah guys, and I'm pretty impressed with the majority of these players on the team. Let's talk about the other guy that I really like is Gordo Hayward. He did drop off a little bit this season, finished the year as the 54th ranked player, down from 38th last year in 9-cat leagues. He's a better option in 8-cat, where he was 39th, but that's down from 23rd the year before. So a bit of a drop off from Hayward. He still played 36 minutes a game and was just a tick under 20 points at 19.7. He hit 1.8 threes. He had 5 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 1.2 steals, 43 and 82 as his percentages. But the drop-off that he had this season, the scoring went up, the 3-pointers went up, the rebounds went up, but the assists dropped off from over 4, and he's seen a decline in his assist numbers over the last 2 seasons. His field goal percentage dropped from 45 to 43. That's a bit of a concern. His steals dropped from 1.4, which they'd been in the last 2 seasons, down to 1.2, and instead of hitting 36% of his threes this year, he only hit 35. So it's not a big drop-off, but overall, just those slight drops in percentages, the slight drops in assists and steal numbers, it contributed to him falling just that little bit. Now, I do really like Hayward. He's going to be a guy that has got a player option in 2017-18, which he will almost assuredly opt out of to get himself a big deal, and he will attract a max deal then. Whether he remains in Utah remains to be seen, but I think that he probably will. And at 26 years old, we haven't seen the best from Gordo. He can be a 25 and a half, 4.5 sort of player who then hits 1.8 threes and gives you 1.5 steals at 45 and 85. They're numbers that could be peak Hayward, and that to me is a comfortable top 25 player. I think that you'll be able to get him in a discount in drafts heading into next season, because the way that he finished outside the top 50% People don't like looking at that. And if I can get him outside the top 50, I'm swarming all over it. I'm targeting him in dynasty leagues. I think that he is a tremendous player. And as the team improves, I think that his numbers will improve as well. His percentages will go up. That field goal percentage might jump 2 or 3%. And that's enough to jump him 1 or 2 rounds in rankings. I do really like Gordon Hayward. I think that he is an underrated player again in real life and in fantasy. And he's got a lot to offer, in my opinion, as a real life player. And I would love him to have him on any of my teams. And I draft him in a lot of different places. Let's talk Rudy Gobert, who was a guy that was clearly disappointing as a player this year when a lot of people took him in the second round, took him at the start of the second round on the turn in drafts. And it was something that I did caution against pretty drastically in the preseason, mainly because he has such big negatives. He is a really poor scorer. He was a guy that was almost necessitating a punt free throw build. That's the way that we're projecting him in the offseason, and it turned out that was almost the case, shooting just 57% on 4.6 attempts, which is not a true absolute have to punt, but if your team is not built around it, then you're going to struggle. And a lot of people didn't take that in consideration. They were thinking he would go from a 65 to a 70% guy when he regressed down to a 57 and took more attempts. He's the injury, the knee problem really did slow him down. And he ended up averaging just 9.1 points, 11 rebounds, 0.7 steals, 2.1 blocks, 56 from the field, and 57 from the free throw line. So in terms of what he did, yes, they're all career best numbers. Well, not his field goal percentage because he didn't play a full season last year, but they were decreases from what he did at the end of last season, his second half numbers. And a lot of people were disappointed. But to me, and again, I don't want to go back and harp on what I said preseason. His numbers to me aren't someone I want in the second round. Yes, he gives you a lot of blocks, 2.1, but that's not 3. That's not 3.5 blocks, which is what he was threatening. And he gives you good rebounding, and he gives you solid field goal percentage. But he's a negative everywhere else. He's not average. He's not a neutral. He's a negative. He's a negative in points. He doesn't hit threes. He doesn't get assists. His steals are terrible, and his free throws is woeful. So you're getting a decent positive in 2 categories. And then the field goal percentage was okay, but he takes no shots. 5.8 attempts is nothing. And yes, 4.6 attempts for free throw, that's less. But in terms of relativity, the biggest impact that has, the 4.6 attempts is in the upper echelon of free throw attempts. 5.8 field goals is way down. So the impact that has is marginal. In fact, the positive impact he has in his field goal percentage is half of the negative impact he has from his free throws. So let that sink in, and you go, well, he shoots 56%. Great. But on the limited attempts that he takes, it is half as impactful as the free throws are negative to him. Now, people will be hesitant with Gobert. He finished the season 67th in 9-cat leagues. He finished 68th in 8-cat leagues. His average draft position was 17, so obviously a big bust in that sense. Post All-Star, he was absolutely dreadful in terms of ranking 170th in 9-cat, 137th in 8-cat leagues. They are not good numbers from Gobert. He did drop off then because he started shooting, again, more attempts from the free throw line and at a worse percentage. And that's a combination that you can't have. That the block numbers dropped down to below 2 as well. The field goal percentage dropped down as well. Nothing was really great. But the positive thing about Gobert, he led the team in defensive box score plus minus. He led the team in overall box score plus minus. He finished third on the team in win shares. He finished fourth on the team, and that's actually the third on the team in win shares per 48 minutes. So he was still extraordinarily valuable to this team from an advanced perspective. He had the team leading VORP as well. He posted an above average PER. So it wasn't a horrible season. It was horrible in relation to fantasy expectations, but overall he still played well. He dealt with a knee injury, and if we look at his numbers, I said that his post All-Star numbers were terrible, but pre All-Star he was ranked 25th. In 9-cat. In 8-cat, he was ranked 29th. So you're going to see him slide. He's not going to go in the second round, and he never should have. Will he go in the third round? I don't think that he's going to get drafted in the third round. I think that you look at him in the 4th or 5th round and be pretty bloody happy about it. That is the exact spot that you want to get him. Now, you are going to have to really consider his free throw percentage, and in a roto league, he's going to be tough to deal with because of just so many negatives. But in a head-to-head with the right build as your 4th or 5th pick, I think he's absolutely tremendous value there. Would I take him before Favors? No, I wouldn't. I would take Favors ahead of him because I think that Favors just does more. But Gobert in that fourth or probably even fifth round, you might be able to sneak him, depending on on what happens over the preseason and off season, that sort of stuff. I reckon you can sneak him in that range, and I think it'll be tremendous value. And you could very easily return a top 30 type of season. So this is the lowest point that he'll probably have, especially given the way he ended the season. Dynasty leaguers, try to acquire him if you can, because he's not the flavor of the month in the big centers. That goes to Drummond. That goes to Whiteside. That goes to DeAndre Jordan. He's well down that pecking order of big men who don't hit free throws. So this is the low point in his career. He could easily come out and have 3 blocks a game next season, score 12 points, grab 12 rebounds a game. He's never going to do all these other things in great numbers. And as much of a Rudy Gobert, I wasn't a hater. I was a temperer. I didn't hate him. I just tempered his expectations last season. But it's always, with all of these guys, about relative value. And I think that relative value for Gobert at this point in the season in a dynasty format or heading into next year, I think that relative value for Gobert is going to mean he's going to be marginally underrated. And that's something that you need to be aware of. And again, it's something that I do stress all the time, is that it's not about hating a player. It's about hating the perception or hating the circumstance that he's in. Next player, Rod Hood. I'm a massive Rod fan. He is a guy that I think can be a really, really great player in this league. You would have heard, or hopefully you would have heard, my interview with Joe Ingles on this podcast across All-Star break, and he was he's enamored by what Rod can do. Being one of the more talented players on this team, and they knew immediately that he was going to put up some really good numbers and be a key player, and he was. He slotted into that starting shooting guard spot effortlessly, and I don't think Burks is going to be able to retain that job from him. He's going to play minutes there, and he's going to put up big numbers. Now, he was the 95th ranked player in 9-cat leagues, 97th in 8-cat, and from a jump last season of 218th, he took a huge step forward. We played 32 minutes a game at 14.5 points. He hit 2 threes. He had 3.5 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 0.9 steals, 42 and 86 as his percentages. He shot 36% from 3. We can see an improvement in his field goal percentage again, maybe to 43, 44 next season. His ball handling was absolutely tremendous this year, not something that we ever anticipated. He took his assists per 36 minutes up to 3 per 36. An improvement on his rookie year. In big 3-point shooting numbers. I was just really impressed with what Rod could do. Now, he is a bit of an older rookie. He didn't come in as a freshman. He's 23 years old now, coming into his 3rd season. I still think he's obviously on a tremendously valuable contract at $1.3 million. That's superb if you're playing in a league with real salary caps, which one of the Red Rock Dynasty leagues will be. I think he's a great option there. But how much better does he get? I think he's still got room to improve over the next 2 years and can still get better. And to me, his upside is probably a top 60 guy, maybe top 50. But it really depends on who else is around him in terms of where he can go with his scoring, his ball handling. But at 14.5 points with 2 triples a game, 3.5, 2.5 as rebounds, assists, there's a lot to like there. He's a great free throw shooter as well. He can play defense. I do really, really like what Hood can do. Now, the advanced numbers really liked him as well. He was 4th on the team in win shares. He put up 6 total there. His win shares per 48 were in the top half of the team. His box score plus minus, not awesome, 0.7, but still on the positive side of things, and put together some pretty nice games. He finished 4th on the team in VORP as well. Just really the 4th guy in that foursome that they've got: Hayward, Favors, Gobert, and Hood. And with the way that he improved in his rookie season, I think that heading into his 3rd year, he's got another step of another 20-spot ranking leap. I think that he's got that in him. Whether it happens or not remains to be seen. But to me, he's a guy that I really do think can continue to improve and can be a guy who maybe tops out at 16, 17 points per game, 2.5 threes, and can add a steal, can add 3 assists. Almost an Eric Gordon, but without being completely horrible on defense. And maybe his upside's a little bit higher than Eric Gordon, but that's the sort of thing we can expect with some more things, with some more steals, with some more actual on-court defense, with some more rebounding, with a better field goal percentage. I think he can offer all of those things. So I'm all in for Rod. Let's talk Dante Exum now. We don't have stats to talk about with Dante because he didn't play. But he was a guy that I thought was primed for a really big season. He looked great in the Utah Summer League where he played a couple of games, put in some really big performances, sprained his ankle, missed all of Vegas. Then he went to play for the Australian national team, tore his ACL. It's not great, a guy heading into his second season. He is still just ridiculously young. We know that. Now, he's only played one season in the NBA and not in a big role, but he's 20 years old. The good thing about him tearing his ACL in July, if you could say there's a good thing, is that by the time the NBA season rolls around, he is 15 months removed from ACL surgery. Jabari Parker tore it in January, and I was very hesitant about drafting him coming in because he was recovering from ACL surgery, and how long was it going to take him to get right? And it took him 2-3 months to really get right. 12 months, 13 months, and then he's had a fantastic second half of the season. Exum will have some rust, but he's not going to have 3 months of rust because he will be basically back well before the season begins, well before preseason, putting in full workload, playing full preseason, playing all that stuff as he recovers from his knee. So if you're going to tear an ACL, it's the perfect time because he's going to be able to come back and play, have a full training camp, have a full preseason, and be ready to go when opening night kicks off as a guy that's going to hopefully blossom. I'm really excited for what he does. He's not someone that you're going to be massively confident there's going to be a top 70 guy or anything like that, but he is a guy that I'm definitely picking with one of my last couple of picks, hoping it works out. And I do think it works out. I think that he's got tremendous scoring touch. He's a great on-ball defender. The steals numbers will come. The assists will come. The scoring, I said, will come. He's got to develop a three-point shot, which I think he can, and really excited for what Exum brings. Look, someone might own Exum in a dynasty league and they might buy into Shelvin Mack. Cool. Don't. Shelvin Mack was good to a degree when he came in, put up some nice stats, but he was forced into that because the other guys behind him were just total garbage. Hale Neto didn't do anything. Trey Burke was invisible, and Mack was forced into that role. Mack is not going to be the starting point guard over Dante Exum. I don't think the Jazz will be really looking to bring someone in to replace Dante Exum. They still have extraordinarily high hopes for him, and they still believe that he is a franchise point guard for this team. They might bring in a higher quality backup than Mack, but Exum will be the starter on this team, and he will play 27 to 30 minutes. He might start at 27, but I reckon by the end of the year, we'll see him playing 30, 32 minutes and putting up numbers that should be approaching the top 100. Now, when he played in his rookie year, he didn't get anywhere near that. He was really poor. He was a guy that brought up the ball from half court, passed it to someone, sat in the corner. I think he's going to be way more involved in things. He's going to be more aggressive, and he's a bit of a sleeper breakout type, flyer type that I pick at the end of drafts and hope that it works out. It very well might not, and he might find himself mired in the rankings range of 180 or something along those lines. But really excited to see what Dante can do next season. Alec Burks had a real disappointing year. That the leg fracture didn't help. Of course, he finished the season ranked 266th in 9-cat leagues, 213th in 8-cat leagues. He came in with a real opportunity to solidify himself as a key player on this team. He only played 26 minutes a night, though. 13.3 points. He hit a 3 a game, had 3.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 0.6 steals, 41 and 75 is his percentages, and he hit 41% from 3. So that's part of what's keeping him as an intriguing guy to me. But Hood has clearly passed him. I don't think that Burks' best role is as sixth man anyway. He can play point guard. He can play shooting guard he can play point to a degree. And the 41% from 3, I'm not sure how sustainable that is, but he's a really good scorer in that microwave spark plug sort of role. Hits the threes, dishes some assists, plays some defense. I think that's his role, but I don't think he's a guy that really is going to be a 30-minute-a-night guy. He's a 25-minute-a-night guy. His numbers weren't fantastic during the season. His win shares are obviously down because that's a cumulative metric, but his box score plus minus saw him ranking behind Hale Neto. That's not a good number, a really poor defensive number of negative 1.6. In terms of his win shares per 48, he finished 8th, so not terrible there, but still nothing overly exciting when I look at his advanced numbers that make me get all tingly or anything along those lines. True shooting of just 52, that's not a superb number. He gets to the line at a tremendous rate, but he didn't convert them very well last season. Normally he's a better free throw shooter than that, but he does get there at a pretty high rate. So if he can get to 80%, 82% from the line, that's going to be a real string in his fantasy bow. But I don't reckon he's going to be someone that's a draftable player in standard leagues, and probably 150 to 200 is the ranking range where we'll see him fall. And with the way that we're going to have Exum developing and Hood developing, I think that he gets stuck in that role, and that's absolutely fine. And he'll be perfect for that team on a $12 million deal. That's exactly what you need, a guy to come in, score 14 points off the bench, play 25 minutes, handle the ball, do a little bit of stuff, but it's not going to really impact majority of fantasy leagues moving forward. Shelvin Mack, came across post All-Star break. He played he was ranked 285th for the year, but 178 in 9-cat post All-Star. For 8-cat, it's a better story, 218th and then 112 post All-Star break. But will he do it again? You'd have to say no. He played 21 minutes on average for the season. 8.5, 2.5, 3.5, 0.8 threes, 0.7 steals, 44 and 74. Decent numbers, but when you dig into what he actually did, he wasn't massively impressive to me. He had a really poor win shares per 48. His box score plus minus was a negative. It wasn't ideal there. He's not the greatest defender. He's not a terrible defender, but he's not a great defender. To me, he's perfectly suited to a backup. Now, he played as third string point guard in Atlanta and came across and literally look at who's ahead of him. Now, Neto and Burke, no wonder he got minutes, but he will go back to a backup role. Any hope of him retaining that top 120, top 100 sort of ranking range, I don't think there's any chance of that happening with Mac. Again, he's got that non-guaranteed deal. He's 26 years old. I reckon they guarantee it and bring him back, but he's not going to be playing that same sort of role, and I don't think that he should be a starting point guard on any team in the NBA. There are clearly 30 better point guards in the NBA to me than Shelvin Mack, and he shouldn't be one of them. And that's going to mean that standard leaguers, you're not going to care about Mack, and dynasty leaguers, he's going to have value as that decent backup guy. But even then, the Jazz could very well bring in a better backup point guard and leave him alone and leave him to be the third stringer, because he's just not that good. He's okay. He's decent at times when pressed into service, but he wasn't superb when he played with the starting unit. He had some games where it was just completely ludicrous, some of the things he was doing, because it's just not who he is as a player. He increased some of his stats tremendously, but he's a 31% shooter from three. That's not a great number. He needs to be better than that. So I can see him playing less than 20 minutes a game this season and not really being too much of a factor. Trey Burke, just an absolutely abomination. That's a horrible phrase, an absolute abomination of a season from Burke. He played 64 games and 21 minutes per contest, 10.6 points, which isn't not too bad. Only 4 other guys scored more than him, but his overall play was just dreadful. 1.4 threes, 1.8 rebounds, which is just such a dreadfully low number. 2.3 assists, half a steal, 41 and 82, and shot 34% from three. He took a big step back. If you can't beat out Hal Neto and then Shelvin Mack, then I don't know what hope we have for him. He's going to be extension eligible heading into this start of this season. I don't think he gets that. He's still only 23, so he can have a role, but there's a chance that he becomes the backup point guard behind Shelvin Mack and is used more as a scorer than as a distributor. But he's never been a guy that's shown great shooting. He shot 34% from three this year. That's not fantastic. 32 the year before, 33 the year before that. He had a big decline in his production in terms of his ball handling. It went from 5.2 assists per 36 down to 3.9. He did shoot over 40% for the first time in his career, which was a big detriment in his game. So working on things, but Trey Burke's ability to be a starter in this league, it feels like it's non-existent at this point, and he's literally just going to be that guy who floats around in 20-team leagues and has occasional value if someone gets injured and he has to play a 25-minute night once or twice and hits 2 or 3 threes, but it just doesn't happen often enough. Nothing in his advanced stats make him look overly appealing either. He finished 11th in win shares per 48. He was well down in win shares as well, finishing 9th on the team there. His box score plus minus was nothing to write home about, actually finishing behind a guy like Chris Johnson, and that's not a great sign there as well. And overall, his VORP as a 0, so just a completely average player, and I think that's probably the perfect way of describing Trey Burke at this point. Finished the year ranked 258th, and you think, oh, that's terrible, but he was only 190th the year before. He just hasn't shown us really much at all from a fantasy point of view. Jeff Withey, really underrated signing. He didn't really get a huge amount of time in New Orleans, but when he played, he looked impressive. And same here, when Gobert and Favors were out, he would start, and he was a must-own player for a stretch of a couple of weeks in January. His per 36 numbers, it ranked him as the 65th best player in per 36 numbers. He ended the year as the 229th ranked player, which is a massive bargain. If you happen to get him in a 30-team league, you would have been absolutely wrapped with the production he gave us. 13 minutes, 4.3 points, 3.4 rebounds, a block, half a steal, 54 and 73%. So great percentage numbers, really efficient, really good rebounding rates, really great shot blocking numbers. He is the best backup on this team. T-Ball Police struggled a lot as a backup center, so Withy is that guy. But the problem you have is Trey Lyles is there. So Lyles can come in and play the 4, and that moves Favors to center. So in essence, Favors is the backup center. So it means Withy is playing third-string minutes, and that's going to limit any impact he can have. Now, in terms of his impact, it was great. He was the second on the team in defensive box score plus minus. He posted a box score plus minus total of 1.7, which was 4th overall on the team. His win shares per 48, he was second on the team behind Favors. He was a key contributor to this team. He had a PER of 17.7, a true shooting of 58%. Like really, really good numbers. They need to bring him back to be that backup center guy, or that third string center behind Favors and Gobert. But when he comes in, not that they don't miss a beat, because they do, but he provides enough where you can look at him and go, okay, well, this is encouraging. We're not going to get slaughtered. In fact, the team was 3 points per 100 possessions better when he was on the court versus when he was off the court. And that's a pretty significant amount for a guy who's a bench player. You look at someone like Rudy Gobert, he was 4.9 plus. It's still better, but not massively better. Favors was actually a negative 0.1. And Trevor Booker was a positive 1.1. So I think Withy definitely held his own in terms of what he was able to do on the court. Trey Burke, if we're looking at those on-off numbers, he was a negative 4.8. So the team obviously thrived when he wasn't there, and that's no surprise at all. Raul Neto, really terrible from a fantasy point of view, but from what he did on the court, I thought that he did exactly what he was needed to do, and he was a relatively key contributor for this team. He played 19 minutes a game in 81 games as a rookie. 5.9 points. He hit 0.8 threes. He had 2 assists, 0.8 steals, 43 and 74. He shot 40% from three-point range. But what do we make of Neto moving forward? 24 years old, so he's not super old. He's not Marcelo Huertas. He's not Pablo Prigioni. He's only 24. So he signed for 2 more years at basically league minimum numbers. So he could stick around. I would rather have him than Trey Burke, most likely. It really depends on who else you've got with him, but I think that he can put up some okay numbers, also okay play. The numbers don't do him a huge amount of favors. He's not a guy that's putting up big stats, definitely. But his box score plus minus was actually better than what Alec Burks' was. Defensively, I think he's a pretty key contributor. But Exum's going to take a lot of that role as that defensive point guard. His win shares were horrible, not all that interesting. But in terms of plus minus on off, the team was 2.4 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court versus when he sat, and that's a pretty big difference, and one of the top numbers on the team. Shelvin Mack, for reference, was 7.5 points per 100 possessions better the team was when he played, and that's a pretty staggering number, to be honest, to look at that. And it's only in a small amount of court time, but it's still a pretty amazing performance from Mackie there. Neto, can he get better? Yes, it was his rookie season, but he won't have a better opportunity than that coming forward. He won't have that opportunity to start as many games as he did, to play 19 minutes. He might replace Burke in his role. They might get rid of Mack and let him just handle that role. But with Burke, with Mack, with Exum around, Neto's value, as marginal as it was, is going to drop. Now, he was the 316th player for the year, 283rd in 8K leagues, and that's sort of the range where he's going to be. You're a really deep dynasty, you hold him and you just see what happens, because he is not old. He does have a little bit of potential, but nothing super exciting that makes me jump out of my chair or anything like that. Joey Ingles, first NBA player on the podcast. He did what he needed to do when he needed to do it. He was ranked 300th, and not many people would own him in their fantasy leagues. He had some decent numbers, but when guys like Gordon Hayward are out, he stepped in, and he was a guy that, for a stretch of maybe a week or so, you had to look at owning him because he was putting up big numbers, and he does that. He does exactly what's needed at the time when it's needed. He averaged 4 points, but he hit a 3 a game in just 15 minutes. He had 2 rebounds, he had 0.7 steals, and was 43 and 72, and shot 39% from 3. And that's his role, to come out there to handle the ball, to be, in his own words, the best inbound passer in the game, and to play defense. And I think that he did all those roles really well. He's got another year left on his deal. at $2 million. Does he ever become a better than ranked 250 player? Only if Gordon Hayward goes down and then he slots into a bigger role and he can actually be a top 150 guy in that sort of situation. But to bank on that is pretty tough. His win shares per 48 placed him 9th on the team. It's a pretty decent number. And in terms of his box score plus minus, he was 7th. So that's, again, it's a positive. He was a positive in box score plus minus. Only 0.1, but a positive. And defensively, he provides a pretty key role to this team. And he's sort of a glue guy, a guy who handles the ball, does a little bit of everything, hits threes, plays defense, passes, does everything that needs to be done, a key contributor, and he's going to continue to get his minutes. But is it going to translate into anything where we get overly excited? Your league needs to be pretty deep. And I think we've seen exactly who Joe Ingles is in this league, and it's fine, but he's not going to burst through and become this guy that's a must-own across all fantasy leagues. I wouldn't have thought so anyway. Trey Lyles. Love Trey Lyles. The numbers don't really get me excited when you look at them. 312th for the season. That's not good. 317th, equally bad. 246 post-All-Star. Now we're getting somewhere. But it was just watching him play. When he got the opportunity, he started putting in some really, really interesting numbers. He averaged just 17 minutes a game for the season. He played 80 games, 6 points. He hit 0.6 threes at 39%, which is a key number for a big and who didn't really take threes or didn't shoot him that well in college, but always had that ability. And to hit 0.6 threes at 39%, is great as a rookie. He had 3.7 rebounds. He had 44 and 70 as his percentage. So he's got heaps of room to grow there. And we know second-year players take a big jump. So to see him go to 46 and 75 next season won't be a huge surprise. He could easily shoot 39% from three again. He does need to work on his defense. His defensive numbers were quite poor. And his defense wasn't overly poor, but his defensive numbers were poor. And he's got a lot of room to grow offensively. Like box score plus minus, he was one of the worst players on the team. But if we look at win shares, he's right up there. He finished 8th on the team in win shares and put together some pretty impressive performances in that second half of the season when he was getting – initially they were going with Trevor Booker in terms of his or when Favors got injured. But when Favors had that knee problem at the end of the year, Lyles was the guy that they went to, and Lyles started starting. He played big minutes, and he started putting together some pretty impressive performances that made us look and go, okay, well, here's something to be interested in. In games where he played 30-plus minutes, which there were 8 of them, he averaged 14 points, 7.5 rebounds, 2 assists. He had a true shooting of 55% in those games, hitting 43% of his threes. These are great numbers. He had an offensive rating of 106 and a defensive rating of 100. They're obviously superb numbers. Now, how reliable is it? It's only an 8-game sample, so we don't know that yet, and his on-off numbers don't look great. But I think that Trey Lyles is going to take a big step forward, and he should inherit that primary backup big man role from Trevor Booker. But when you've got Favors and you've got Gobert ahead of you, he's not going to be really challenging to be a standard league guy. He should play over 20 minutes a game next year, but that's not going to be a top 150 player. But if you've got the long-term aspirations in a dynasty league, I think that he has easily got top 70 upside. I think he can do tremendous amount of things. I'm super excited for him, but you're going to have to wait. It is going to take 3-4 years maybe for him to really start to realize it. And a lot of that's to do with situation with Favors and Gobert ahead of him. He needs a spot. Maybe he gets traded. Maybe he gets somewhere else, but he gets a spot where he plays 34 minutes, 32 minutes as a starting power forward and starts hitting a 3 a game and averaging 17 points and 8 rebounds and getting his percentages right up there, which he's definitely able to do. The sky is the limit, but the problem is reaching that limit is going to take quite a while, and you're going to have to develop a lot of patience. And if you're in like a 12-team keeper league or dynasty league, it's almost impossible to hold on to him for the next 2 seasons. You need to have the ability to go really deep, to go to 250 players deep, maybe 200 deep, and hold on and go from there. Because if it's standard size, you're not going to be able to withstand that sort of performance where he doesn't quite get there for the next couple of seasons. The last 2 guys on this team, Chris Johnson, we don't need to talk much about him. I don't think that he'll be back. He had one good game where he played out of his brain. Didn't last. 2.9 points, half a 3, half a steal, 0.3 blocks, 37 and 81. He's a guy that hits threes, he gets steals. If for some reason he's pushed into a role, then the numbers will come. But you're going to need a situation where Hayward's out, where Hood's out, with Burks is out, with Ingles out for him to really start to thrive. And I don't think there's much future for Chris Johnson in the NBA, unfortunately. Tibor Pleiss came across, and I was mildly intrigued to see what he could do. He struggled. He was 449th ranked player for the season. He didn't play at all after the All-Star break. He played just 12 games at 7 minutes, 2 points, 1.3 rebounds, 0.2 blocks. Didn't miss a free throw, so that's something. But otherwise, he was poor. He was a negative 0.1 in win shares. He was the worst on the team in win shares per 48. He was the worst on the team in box score plus minus at a horrific negative 8.1. And I'm not sure what he offers. Now, he'll have a much better second season, but he was clearly behind Withy in the rotation. And with Lyles, Withy, Favors, Gobert, he was the fifth big, and Booker, he was the sixth big. Booker might go. Maybe it moves him up to the fifth big. He can easily break the top 400 next season, but I'm not placing a huge amount of faith in Pleiss. I didn't really love what I saw from him. I was intrigued to see him come over. It didn't work out this year, and I'm not overly enticed. But if your league's 400 players deep, he should be rostered because he could start to develop. Maybe Withy's not retained. Maybe Booker's gone and they have more faith in him. But Quinn Snyder had zero faith in him last season, and it wasn't without reason. All right, that is it for the current crop of Utah Jazz players. I'm going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be back to talk overseas stashed players and some questions from you guys.
Now I had a dream of you on that cold September night. I had nothing left to look forward to. I thought you were all I wanted, but I never really knew just what you could do. Never want to leave you, 'cause I think it's worth to be alone. Times like this I wonder if I'd be better.
All right, guys, we're back. We're going to we'll finish off our Utah Jazz season in review by talking about a player they drafted in the second round last season, a point guard, and that is Olivier Hanlon. He did not sign. He opted to go overseas, and he did go overseas. He ended up playing for Zalgiris, which I think, from memory, is Lithuania, maybe? I think it's Lithuania. Anyway, Zalgiris was the name of the team. Didn't stand out. He struggled in at Summer League. His time with Zalgiris, he played 62 games. He only played 20 minutes a game. He averaged 7.6 points, 1.8 assists, 2.4 rebounds, 0.6 steals, and nothing really to write home about. 37% from three is decent. 40% from the field is not. 74 from the line, not. Win shares, not really anything to be excited about. His offense struggled. His offensive rating was terrible. His PER was 10. Nothing really gets you excited. And when you've got Exum coming back, and Neto showed enough to be considered ahead of him. You'd have Trey Burke ahead of him. You'd have Shelvin Mack ahead of him. Not sure there's much to get really excited about Olivier Hanlon, and I wouldn't really be wasting any resources holding on to him moving forward. The next question, or the next part, we're going to talk about questions for the podcast. And the first one of those comes from Sam Phillip, and he says, is Dante Exum a possibility for a third-year breakout? Talked about it before. Yes, absolutely. Now, the problem is it's not really it's his third year technically, but it's his second year of on-court time, so I don't expect a huge breakout. But again, as I mentioned, he's a guy that I'd be looking at with your 12th pick, with your 13th pick, if he's still around, and hoping that you can get a top 80 sort of season out of him. I don't think that's a crazy expectation. Maybe it is a little bit crazy, but I think that he can take that sort of developmental step, and he was already threatening it last season. And I think one more year, hopefully getting himself a bit stronger, a bit more immersed in the playbook, I think that he really can step forward and become an interesting guy. Joseph Diefenbach asks a similar question, not the same. First of all, he says, will they quicken their pace next season? And who will emerge in the backcourt and take the reins? Will they quicken their pace? Well, they were the worst team, or the slowest team in the league. They finished 30th in the league in pace at 91 possessions per game. That's obviously really poor. I don't really see why Quinn Snyder changes what he's doing. Yes, they didn't make the playoffs, but there's a lot of other reasons. I don't think it's because they played slow. Their personnel is not necessarily designed to be whipping up and down the court when you've got a Favors go be a front court. Haywood, I don't think that they're going to look. They might increase it marginally, but not enough to have an impact for a fantasy point of view. Who will step out and take the reins in the backcourt? It's Exum. It has to be Exum. Maybe he struggles and they have to go back to Mac at some point, but Exum is going to be given every opportunity to take this job back and start to thrive. And I think they're really, really interested in seeing that and getting him ready to go. And I think that I can't see it. I can't see it being Mac. I would put money on it being Exum, being the guy who starts the season, or who by the end of the season plays the most minutes at the point guard spot. We are done today, guys. You'll probably listen to this podcast just before Game 7 of the Warriors and the Thunder. Good luck to those guys. Good luck to you if they're your team. Can't wait to watch it. Should be a super exciting game. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball. You can always like the page on Facebook at facebook.com/redrockbasketball. And, of course, check out Basketball Monster and their Twitter account, or our Twitter account, at BaskMonster, and listen to all the great podcasts on hardwood paroxysm and read the great articles over there. We are done. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.